Tonight's conversation on representation, power, and joy will unfold in three distinct parts. First, we're going to begin by discussing representation, power, and joy in various media, particularly film and television. Then we're going to transition to a conversation with Paloma Valenzuela. Paloma is our guest artist and educator for our discussion tonight. She's going to talk a bit about her work with the Pineapple Diaries, which is a web series focused in Boston. She's a wonderful filmmaker and storyteller, and she'll have so much to offer. Finally, we're going to then zoom out and consider the role of storytelling in society and why telling and seeking out diverse stories matters. That being said, just wanted to say a bit of a disclaimer in that tonight's conversation might feel a little bit different than what you're used to. It's not a webinar, it's not a lecture, this isn't a class, and it's also not necessarily an artist talk in the traditional sense. And the reason for that is quite intentional on our part. That's because while we may have ideas about representation, power, and joy, we're not by any means the sole experts on the topic, right? We know that everyone that is joining this conversation has something important to say about that topic, and hearing from you will only enrich our time together. So we're going to invite your voice into the conversation, and we're going to do so beginning in just a moment. We're sliding now into part one. And as we do so, I wanted to say a little bit more about Paloma. Paloma is a very talented filmmaker, and in the broadest sense, really a storyteller. Her work with the Pineapple Diaries focuses on representing Boston's JP Latinx communities, communities that are sometimes overlooked or perhaps ignored in larger discourses in the city. So when Paloma and I began planning for tonight's conversation, we quickly fell down a rabbit hole. And by that, what I mean is that we got carried away talking about the different TV shows and films that we were watching on Netflix. We started exchanging hot, and in my case, less hot takes about the Oprah interview with Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. And then after a few minutes, our conversation got a little bit more personal, and we started talking about the different kinds of TV shows and films that we watched growing up, and how those things helped us feel seen, but also sometimes unseen, right? So in a lot of ways, we were just kind of geeking out, but that became a generative way for us to really have a powerful conversation about representation, power, and joy. And we wanted to invite all of you into that conversation with us to expand our thinking. And so here's how this is going to work. We're going to spend the next 6 or 7 minutes reflecting on a media representation that has helped you feel seen in some way, or at least a part of yourself feel seen. It can be a film or a television show. It can be a character in a film or television show, something that you've seen recently, or maybe perhaps something that you've seen several years ago that has stayed with you ever since. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to ask you to share your example using Padlet. So we'll give you a few moments to think, and then I am going to walk us through how Padlet works. Some of you might be familiar with it, others perhaps not, but it's quite easy. So let me share my screen once again. So this is Padlet. It's basically a digital kind of corkboard where you can post notes and media. And the way that you do that is by clicking this bottom right-hand corner, this sort of pink plus sign, and you'll see a blank note appear. And you can feel free to type in whatever you'd like. And if you'd like to get fancy, you can click on this magnifying glass here, and it'll bring up a series of libraries on the right here. And so you can scroll through those if you'd like to animate your example and put something a little bit more concrete in there. Feel free to spice things up. So we'll give you about 5 or 6 minutes to work on this, and then we'll ask for a few folks to share. All right, so I am just looking at everything kind of pop up in our shared gallery here, and noticing some really interesting connections and things that I certainly identify with, and that's really fun. Anyone see anything in particular that stands out to you, or perhaps if you'd like to share a little bit more about what you posted? Feel free to jump right in.
I'll just say it's so fun to see all these images. Yeah, and it was I remember underlining aspects of Harriet the Spy with a highlighter all through my young childhood years, and was very happy when it out as a film, but disappointed that the girl's hair was long because my hair was always short. And being that tomboy, it was just really fun to see the images there.
Yeah. Keita, it's funny that you mentioned hair because I posted the post of Tori from Saved by the Bell, mainly because of the curly hair. I feel like maybe curly hair is starting to have a little bit more of a comeback in film and television, but certainly when I was growing up in the early 90s, it didn't seem that way. So it was really fun for me to see someone with very bold curls on TV, and also like a woman that her identity was, structured around school and being a good student and being studious, and that being, celebrated by her friends. So I thought that that was something that was powerful for me to see growing up. Anyone else like to share or jump in?
I can share. Hi, Raquel.
Hi.
I included Shakira, Selena, and Zena, and that wasn't intended to rhyme, but it is National Poetry Month. Because as a teenager, the idea of being an immigrant, of being a Latinx person, though we didn't have that phrase, and then also being queer, which Zena was really the only image I had, let alone I didn't even include like the Christian rockers that I listened to, one of which later on came out of the closet. So I just like, I was really drawn to powerful women that fully own themselves, because I think I felt completely disjointed, and like I could never, like merging all parts of myself would be an impossibility. Something that happened later, but when you're 15, you don't think it's gonna.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing that, Christella. It's, I resonate with the word that you just used, disjointed. And yeah, if that doesn't summarize adolescence, I don't know what does. So yeah, thanks for speaking to that. Maybe we can take a couple more before we move on. If folks want to say a little bit more about what they posted or something that they saw that they were intrigued by, we can go in that direction too.
I could say something that I noticed about this. I was just thinking how interesting it is that it's such a casual thing just to see like something on TV or watch a movie or whatever, but then those interactions really have impact on our lives. So I think that's just really interesting to be reminded of that.
Yeah, I think that sometimes we hear the idea of like a media consumer, right? And I think sometimes that's often a misnomer. I don't think that we're ever just entirely passive consumers of anything. Or I think we're always interacting with the things that we're taking in, we're making sense of it. And we're figuring out what it means to us, and what larger ideas it represents. So absolutely, thanks for bringing that into the conversation.
I would be curious if this person is willing to learn more about what you're building with your spouse. The person who posted the grand design one with the really fun GIF.
Oh yeah, that was me. Um, well, so my spouse and I are sort of at the point in our lives where we're thinking about buying, a house, and just all the housing things are just like really up in my mind right now. So that's that. Just like little, small projects.
Yeah. So it's fun to share this as a practice with a larger number of people. And this is actually pretty much where Paloma and I started our conversation. And Paloma, I wonder if you wanted to elaborate on the example that you talked about a bit.
Yes. Well, I feel like I'm biracial, and I think there's a lot of identity journey going on right now in the world in general. And I always sort of like, oh, I don't chuckle to myself necessarily, but I have this thought in my mind, like this experience people are going through right now, maybe is something I feel like I've been going through my whole life in terms of, I don't know, identity crisis or just identity policing. There's a lot of that going on right now. And I feel like I've experienced that my whole life, because when you're biracial, people try to pinpoint who you are. And I think that in this current environment we're living in right now, and also just in general, I've come to realize that I think everybody feels like their identity is policed, and where they want, what boxes do they put themselves in, et cetera, is sort of a universal experience, not just an experience for me as someone who has this sort of duality, dual cultures, dual races. And so that's interesting. So my, the show that I could identify with, well, the two pieces I want to talk about, one is a TV show, one's a movie. The TV show that I identified with was Seinfeld. And the reason why I identified with the show is because of the humor. It was exactly my cup of tea. It was like my humor. It's sort of that bizarre, neurotic, commenting on every little ridiculous thing, that sort of show about nothing. That's where I find my humor. I like all types of humor, but that's definitely the kind of humor that I felt like matched more with my my sense of humor. And I also felt connected with a movie called Raising Victor Vargas. And not because I'm from New York or even have this sort of family dynamic, but it felt like it was the first time I saw a sort of nuanced, intimate, like art house film with an entire cast of Dominicans. And again, it wasn't about Dominicans in Boston, it was about New Yorkers, which I feel like as Bostonians, we feel really close to New York because we can go there often. And it is sort of like this big city next to our little city. And so it's the closest, like, for instance, if I'm looking for any kind of connection with Dominican culture on television, when I see Dominicans in Washington Heights on television, I feel connected with that, even though I'm not from New York. And so it's interesting because they're two completely different things. Seinfeld, I mean, I guess they're both in New York, but we'll talk about that later. But, you know, completely different things. I mean, Seinfeld was a cast of all white characters. In fact, it was an all white show. It had the bad rep of having little to no diversity whatsoever. There were Jewish characters in the show that I could relate with, obviously, because I'm Jewish as well. And maybe that's where I get my brand of humor. I've always felt that way. Like whenever I see other Jewish comedians, there's this sort of humor that we have. I just can't explain it. And I feel like that's why I could connect with it. But there was like little diversity in that show whatsoever. And then a movie where the protagonists were Dominican American characters. There was no regard for the white gaze. It was a story about growing up. It was a story about opening up to love as opposed to optics. It was just, that's what it was about. And it just happened to be told through the family and characters that were this Dominican family in New York. And it felt like I was like, oh my gosh, like people can make, I swear to you, I think about it now. And like, I just can't believe that this was the thought that I had. This movie came out when I was in high school. I was in high school between 2001 and 2005. And I thought to myself, oh, wow, like, okay, I can make stories about my community. Like I can do that. That's literally what I thought when I saw that movie. Like, oh, I can now, because that's how little there was of that. There was little to no sort of nuanced storytelling where the characters were telling universal stories and they were Dominican characters doing it, or other characters of color in that sense. I could say as I got older, obviously I saw that also in movies like Love and Basketball. I mean, there's a whole array of movies, especially about Black characters that I related to heavily, but not so many where there were specifically Dominican characters. So that's why I connected with that film. And I think that, and again, this is coming from like the conversation with Raquel, where we were like rambling about these topics and this just the stuff that I watched. I watched like literally everything. I mean, I was the type of person that like, I mean, I was listening to, I guess I had a boyfriend in high school that was listening to reggaeton. So I was listening to Más Flo Dos and Looney Tunes because of him. But I was also really into, you know, I was into like that 90s rock music, you know, Matchbox 20, like all that stuff. Like I was listening to all that stuff. Like there isn't this box that I could be put into. I was listening to everything, and I was watching everything, and I was relating a little bit to everything. And I feel like that is so true for so many people, and yet those kinds of characters I feel like don't get portrayed. It's always like, well, if I'm going to be a Dominican character on TV, I better be eating rice and beans and listening to merengue, because that's all we could possibly be doing. And that's how I felt the portrayals were on television and the movies at the time. And that's why I was like, okay, well, white people, white characters get this opportunity to play fully formed, complex characters on television. They can even make a show about nothing and get away with it, Seinfeld or Friends. And yet when it comes to the Latinx characters or other characters of color, it better be about trauma. It better be about the experience of being a person of color in a specific way that is informative to white people. It better be about, it better have all of the sprinklings of what white people expect from us. Otherwise, no one's gonna get it and it's not gonna happen. And I just thought to myself, like, there's a way to have a show like Seinfeld that's about nothing. And I don't want to compare my show to Seinfeld either, because Seinfeld has some pretty awful characters, you know, obviously. But I mean, we love them, but you know, they're pretty like, it's just terrible characters. And so, but the idea that the show is about just everyday things. Like there's an episode, and I bring this up every time, I'm like a broken record. There's an episode about how the characters forgot where they parked in a parking lot, right? And so, you know, that is a storyline that white people get to have. But why can't a show that's about Dominican Americans or characters of color have a plot line about forgetting where you parked in a parking lot? Like that happens to us too. And that to me was really the beginning of wanting to create something like that, wanting to create something that would fill the void that I feel like I didn't have growing up, which was a show that had all of these universal little things, these little like nuanced moments, these little intimate moments that anyone could relate with, and that those that are telling these stories are women of color. And that's why I wanted to create the Pineapple Diaries. That's how it started. That's how the idea, sort of the inception. And so I created a web series, obviously because Netflix wasn't calling me up. I'm still waiting for them to call, but you know, obviously YouTube was a platform that I had access to, as we all do, and it's an amazing thing because you can treat it like your own network. And I decided that I was going to create a television show and treat it as if it was a television show I was creating, and put it on YouTube and have it be that sitcom that I wish I had growing up, a sitcom about women that looked like me and didn't have to look like me either. Women that also depicted the Dominican American community, which is women of different skin colors, women of different races, women of different hair textures. We're all Dominican, but we're not all of the same race. We're not all of the same look. We don't all look like J-Lo, you know, and that also is a whole other thing. And I don't want to keep rambling because I know I will, but that kind of was all of the little things that I wanted to bring into the show, because it was something that I feel like I didn't get to see on TV when I was growing up.
Perfect. And to make that all more concrete, I know that if you may not have seen the Pineapple Diaries, I suggest you fix that problem soon, but we're going to help you do that. We have a scene pulled up in which, well, I don't want to say anymore, but maybe we should just jump in.
¿Qué fue que te hizo decidir a cortarte todo ese pelo?
I don't know. I just didn't want to deal with it anymore. It's too much. Too much hassle.
¿Te queda bien? No hay muchas mujeres que se pueden llevar el pelo así.
Oh, gracias. I mean, like, I remember going to the salon. Oh, the process. Let me tell you, the process, the long waiting, and just being in there forever, and getting my hair washed, and getting it blow dried and straightened. It's too much. I remember I had to go either early in the morning or really late at night. Those salons were always packed. Before you waited to get your hair relaxed or blow dried or put in rolos, you'd sit and wait. I remember looking in those magazines they would leave by the door for us to read to keep busy. When you really pay attention, it's incredible how little of yourself you can find in those magazines. I remember the sound of the bangles that would clack, clack, clack as the lady washed my hair, suds in my ears, combing through my hair trying to get out all the knots, asking me, "Te pica? Te pica?" I remember not having much to say to the woman who did my hair, probably my Spanish. I'd stare up at the telenovelas they would have playing on the big screen, try to understand those Mexican accents. It was like anesthesia, going off into a daze, forgetting myself and hoping to wake up and be more beautiful, I guess. The hot steam that went through my hair, the smell of the products blowing onto my skin, the smell of my hair burning, Johnny Ventura serenading me in the background. When they tried to get them edges, I was always terrified they were gonna burn me. I always hated that part the most. There was always some girl next to me with long flowing hair, and I would always hear the stylist saying things like, "Tienes el pelo precioso, que Dios te bendiga." They never said those things to me. And then, just as soon as you started feeling beautiful because you just got your hair did, they'd wrap your hair in a tubie, so you looked basically like an alien when you left the place. Those tubies laid it down though. I would spend the whole day in my tubie in hopes my hair would stay as straight for as long as possible before I needed to go back the next week.
Yay. Yeah, it's funny to watch these clips because, we filmed in 2015 and I just feel like we were like way younger then. We had all this energy. Actually, we did the third season, 2019, and we were all talking about how we couldn't believe how much energy we had back in 2015. We could barely handle the third season. So yeah, that is a clip from the first season. Again, to sort of like make a long story short, I was living in the Dominican Republic, and this is when I was sort of thinking about all of this and thinking about, again, the kinds of just wanting to put something that felt authentic to me on screen. And I came back to Boston, and I decided that I came back to Boston from the Dominican Republic, and I thought, well, I was here and I kind of fell in love with the city all over again. I was living in DR for 5 years. I'm a Bostonian all my life, so I lived my whole high school, college career here in Boston being like, I need to get out of here. That's the kind of, I feel like that's like the basic feeling I feel like most people, young people have when they're growing up in any city, like they just want to leave. And so when I came back, because I was trying to get back on my feet after living in DR for 5 years, I like had an opportunity to like explore the city again and really like fall in love with my city again. And I thought to myself, like, there is this projection of Boston being this like totally uncool, white racist city. The racism is undeniable, the segregation and all of these issues, but the idea that the city is all white, I think comes from this lack of representation, the lack of representation of communities of color that make up the majority of this city, Boston proper. the lack of representation of Boston, like the way I lived it, like the way my peers at Boston Arts Academy lived it, the way my friends lived it here in Boston. None of us saw any of that on TV. It was never that. And when Ben Affleck and Matt Damon came around and they were, projecting Boston from their perspective, which is completely valid, and I don't take that away from them, it also didn't feel like Boston, not to me. And the idea that, the city is all, first of all white, and it's the most interesting thing about the city is either the history or the mafia or the colleges or the baseball. Again, none of these things felt true to me whatsoever. And so I really wanted to not only make a show that felt representative of the women that I know, the women in my family, and the experiences that I was going through as a 20-something going into my 30s, but I also wanted to find a way to like represent Boston and showcase Boston again from my perspective, from the perspective of, again, my friends and the way that we see Boston, the way that Boston is barely ever shown. And so, yeah, that is what we wanted to do. So we filmed all over the place in Boston. A lot of the cast members are my friends from Boston Arts Academy, who happened to be back in the city at that time. And a lot of them are in different places right now, but it was so serendipitous that we were all together at the same time. And we got together, we did our Indiegogo thing, got a little something to pay for lunches and equipment. And we filmed the entire season with that little bit that we had, and carried on to season 2 and carried on to season 3 with grant support, fellowships, etc. And it has been a beautiful experience. And I think that I didn't expect anything to come out of this show whatsoever. I had no idea what would happen. I knew that I just wanted to create. And I think that the enjoyment that we had filming it was all that really mattered, and all that really matters, in the essence of when you're creating something. Not thinking about the outcome is really important because you can get sidetracked. But I think that when I realized that people were connecting with the show and feeling like they saw themselves in the show, feeling like they saw their neighborhoods in the show, corner stores that they go to, restaurants that they like, seeing Boston from what they felt that they could connect a little bit more with, was incredible. It was more than I could have asked for, because it is what I wanted. Again, it was something I wanted for myself. And I think that if I wanted it for myself, then the outcome was that maybe other people wanted it too. And yeah, so I don't know if you have any questions, Raquel, or, I mean, obviously there's lots of other things to say, but I don't want to, that's
beautiful. That's the perfect start. And you actually have already answered a couple of questions I had in mind, but I did want to ask you about one thing, Paloma. I think that in choosing to center the Latinx community, there is, obviously your show is diverse, right? But it's also exploring diversity within that identity construct, right? We know that Latinx communities are not a monolith. Mm-hmm. That represents many different backgrounds, cultures, histories, etc. And so as a storyteller, when you're thinking about that, you're also in some ways representing experiences that are like yours, but also not like yours. Mm-hmm. So how do you think about that as a storyteller and the ethics of telling stories that are truly diverse?
Yeah, I think that in a perfect world, in terms of budget and possibilities, I would have a writing team. I think most television shows should and do have writing teams so that you have all these variety of voices. I think there are lots of times when any fictional writer has to at some point take on the voice of someone that is not their voice. And I think that I can only say that in my case, any time I touched on something like relationships or experiences growing up or anything like that, it came from a true place. It came from something that I had experienced, or something that a story that I had heard, or some experiences that friends of mine have had, and then I allowed my actors to take it from there. And there's a lot of improvisation in the show. There's a lot of the actors taking on the characters and the dialogue and making it their own. And I think, again, the collaborative experience of this show, I think, to me, helped me feel that I was at least attempting to the best of my ability to make sure that it felt authentic for everybody watching it and everyone involved. And again, authentic is a personal thing, right? What's authentic to me might not be authentic to somebody else, and I understand that. But it was not something I just did all by myself. Like, this was a completely collaborative experience. You know, even after I'm done writing something, it is meant to take on more life. It goes through a process. The actor then interprets it and performs it, and again makes it their own. So yeah, I mean, the jumping off point for me was just saying, like, look, I have friends. I'm Dominican, but I'm also biracial. There's barely any of that anywhere. I don't really see that anywhere. I know that if I was cast in something, I will be cast as either, you know, a fully Mexican person or a fully Puerto Rican person or a fully Colombian person. Like, I barely ever would, I don't think I've ever seen a character that's necessarily biracial, like that's half white American Jewish and who's Afro-Caribbean Dominican. And so I wanted my character to be myself. Like, and I have played characters that were other, you know, that were, you know, I played a character that was fully Dominican in a Dominican movie, and that's fine. I mean, actors can't just play themselves constantly. Okay, that's not what actors are there to do. But for me, it was important to represent that. Like, let me put a character that's like me there. Let me cast my mom. Let me cast my dad. And let's just do it. Like, let's not explain it. We don't need to do this long explanation. It is what it is. My character was a bilingual, biracial person with a Jewish white American mother and a Afro-Caribbean Dominican father. And that was it. And then there was Maite, who is a Black Dominican woman with a Black Dominican mother, and she did not speak Spanish. She didn't grow up speaking Spanish. Her mom speaks Spanish to her. She responds in English. That is an experience that is true to some Latinx and Latinx American people. Not every single Latinx American person in this country speaks Spanish, you know, and that's another thing. It's like, we don't see that enough. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. That is a true experience of what some first generation Americans experience. And again, it is just the truth. So let's not explain it. We're just going to put it out there. I have a character who you know, feels more comfortable speaking Spanish. And even though he's lived in the United States for many years, he speaks Spanish all the time. Again, this is true. This is something I've seen. It's something I've experienced, and I hope other people can relate. And so that kind of like utilizing sort of the trying my best within this fictional show that was like, you know, a web series. We only had about 10, 15 minutes an episode, perhaps, trying my best to display a variety of experiences that, again, I feel like have not or hadn't at that point been explored enough on television.
Thanks for that. So far, a lot of our conversation, Paloma, it's occurring to me, has focused on you as an individual artist, right? But we also know that artists are situated in a larger art world, in a larger field of cultural production. And, you know, in that field, there are gatekeepers that wield tremendous power in terms of what stories are amplified and elevated and what stories, you know, aren't given that platform. And so I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, you know, your experience navigating that, some of the decisions you've made as an independent artist in particular, and just kind of open up that experience to us.
Yeah, I think things are changing. I think that we're all feeling it, and I think we're all seeing it, and it's so important. Like, I'm telling you, besides the amazing 90s sitcoms where we got to see Black American families on the television screen, that also, if you look back in history, seemed like they were utilized as a moment, like a fad, like a trend, although it spoke to many of us, like, you know, Living Single and Girlfriends and all of these wonderful shows that I connected with growing up, the shows that I watched, Family Matters, et cetera, that, you know, in terms of the gatekeepers, it was a moment and then it went away. Same with the Latin boom, which was also something I experienced in my Y2K life. The J-Lo, Mark Anthony, living la vida loca moment. was also completely controlled, I think, by, again, the gatekeepers. And the gatekeepers are concerned about the white gaze. And when they're done with us, they're done with us. And I think that what we're seeing now is executive producers of color. We're seeing them expand their companies to offer platforms for showrunners of color. They're, you know, the Issa Rae's, the Lena Waites, Donald Glover, like all of these shows that again speak to like a more nuanced, non-monolithic experience for people of color is being displayed on television, and they are in control of it. And I think that that is amazing and encouraging, and I hope it only just keeps getting better and better, because the gatekeepers clearly are out of touch. And it is, you know, there's this school of thought that only white characters can tell universal stories. And even as we watch, you know, the Oscars and the Golden Globes going through these like super like late, like y'all are out of time growing pains, like y'all are taking it so, like it's really not that hard. First of all, it's not hard to find like exceptional work by people of color. I mean, better than some of the stuff that I'm seeing nominated, okay? It's not hard. And second of all, you know, not the stories, all stories matter. Let me just say that right now, because it is a belief that I know. All stories are important. I don't care what you say. Every single story is important. Whether you're a privileged white person, your story is important. Everybody's story is important. So I'm not trying to say these stories are not important, but if you notice the pattern of these award shows, and again, these, I guess the example of gatekeepers, the Black stories that they want to see are about trauma. The Black stories that they want to see are about slavery. They want to see these stories where they can capture this moment and say, well, that's in the past. But actually allowing for, again, nuanced, you know, universal, like fully complex, like just stories about nothing with characters of color. Those are the ones that get ignored. Those are the ones that they're like, okay, well, no one's watching this. And that is obviously incorrect. And again, it's out of touch. And so I'm just hoping that the people that seem to be holding on to whatever power they have and not letting enough stories come in somehow find a way to go elsewhere, or just let more people in so that more stories can be told. Because it's not about deciding what stories are more important and who, no, it's about letting more stories in and allowing for a much more expanded idea of what a universal story can look like. I think we're seeing a change. And I think when I started the show, all of these things that I'm talking about, like I said, like Issa Rae, Donald Glover, I feel like I'm saying his name wrong, I don't know why. Childish Gambino, and you know, and Lena Waithe or whatever. Like in 2015, they did not necessarily exist. I mean, Issa Rae was doing her web series, which was amazing, and that's kind of why I was connected to YouTube, because like, okay, well, they're not going to do it on the mainstream stuff, so look at YouTube. Here's Issa Rae creating this incredibly dynamic, hilarious show just about like an awkward girl. Period. Like anyone can relate with that, and she happens to be a Black woman, and that's it. And everyone needs to sit and watch the show and put themselves in her shoes, and that's what everyone needs to experience, more of that, instead of this continual people of color putting themselves in the white characters that they're watching on the screen, because that's what we have to do. That's what audiences do to follow a story. You put yourself in the shoes of the protagonist. So when all stories that you see as mainstream are white, then what can that possibly do to the psyche? What does that do to your self-esteem? What does that do to you're even just wondering whether your life is normal, or whether, you know, can anyone hear you? Are you out there? Are you out there? Like that kind of thing. Like if you're not getting that back, then you're not sure if there's other people in the world that are experiencing what you're experiencing. So when you see more representation on TV, that connection makes your life more enriching. It's so important. And it also, it bleeds into everything else. It bleeds into society. It bleeds into people's perceptions and assumptions about people. It bleeds into how the police are treating people on the streets. It bleeds into all of that. I mean, I know that entertainment is just entertainment, and I understand that there's all of these other components of society, but I truly believe that even within that since art is imitating life, I mean, that what we see on television, what we see in the movies, what we see on the covers of magazines, what we see selling us face cream, all of that bleeds into everything else.
Paloma, I'm so glad that you brought that up, and I'm gonna circle back to that as we wrap, for sure. That's an important thread for us to hold on to. I did want to pivot just a little bit though, because not only are you an artist, but you're also an educator, and being an educator is a really important part of your artistic identity. And so I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what you feel is most important for young people to learn about art, and how to be an artist in this world, and how to move, and how to be, and how to navigate the world as an artist.
Yeah, I've decided recently that I am, that I accept that being an educator is also a part of my, like, passion in life. I think that in the beginning I was like, oh my God, like, am I teaching too much? Like, you if you can't do, you teach, like that whole like BS thing that people say. And I realized, you know what, like, not every artist can actually be a teacher. Not every artist is good at teaching. And I feel like, this is important to me. It's good. I'm good at it, and it runs in my family, and it feels like it just like it runs in my blood. And so teaching is also something that I'm actually passionate about, not just something that I do also to as part of my freelance work. I mean, it's something that I'm passionate about doing. And I think that what really like ignited my wanting to teach, obviously what I know, because I'm not out here teaching algebra. Okay. I Google percentage questions. Okay. I'll write like, what is 50% of, what is 25% off of? I write a whole sentence question. So I'm not teaching any of that. I only teach what I know, which is creative writing, dramatic writing. And I think that my goal has always been to teach what I know, because I think that's a really important thing. Like, I've been taught by wonderful professors and teachers, all throughout my life so far. And files, and I don't want to just hang on to this stuff. Like, I want to teach what I've been taught, that have been my aha moments about storytelling, about structure, about formula, about all this stuff. I want to teach on, and I don't want to necessarily only teach on to those who have the same kind of privileges that I had. And the privileges that I had was, one, being accepted into an arts academy for high school. So I had to audition to get in, and then I got in, and then, secrets were unfolded to me. So I learned. Then I had the privilege of going to higher education, going to college, which is a privilege, which it should not be. Education should not be a privilege, but it was, and it is for me, and for most people, obviously, in our current society. And I learned so much, and I just feel like I want to offer that information to people that are like, come in to take a class with me for free. Like, that's what I want to do, because I just feel that if more community, like the communities I grew up in, are like up and coming kids that are like, maybe they're artists, or maybe they want to be artists, or they're interested, or they're starting out, and if I can offer them the tools to tell their own stories, and to like make sure that they understand that their stories matter, and that they can receive these tools to tell their stories and go forth and tell your stories. And I always make sure people know that, like, as a teacher, that I come from an independent perspective. I'm not coming from Los Angeles. I'm not coming from having spent 10 years working on the Ellen Show or something. Like, I have not as much intel into the actual Hollywood PA world, besides the production stuff I've done in the Dominican Republic, which people can ask me about and I'll let them know. But I also feel like I offer that perspective. Like, okay, this is what I did with my career. I decided to take it into my own hands and do my own independent stuff. It takes a lot of work, because you got to go look for grants, you got to look for fellowships, you got to find the money somewhere. You have to, if you're going to be a freelancer with no agent or no manager, as I have at the moment, you have to go out there and look for work. You have to go out there and make yourself available, put yourself out there, all of these things. I offer that perspective for them. And if they want some other perspective, I have some friends in LA I try to connect them with. I'm just trying to get people to understand that like all of this stuff is accessible. All of this stuff is attainable. Obviously, everything takes hard work. But I also feel like when I was growing up, I feel like there were a lot of adults out there telling me like, oh, like, be wary of the real world. Like, you know what I mean? Like, oh, just so you know, no one's going to read your script. Oh, just so you know, this is never going to happen. Oh, just so you know, by the way, it's like, that is the kind of energy I feel like I received. And I think that because of that, I didn't think that there would be any way I could make it. And I want to flip that. I want to be an adult for the younger people who says, no, y'all got this. It's easy. Here's your phone. Here are the tools I'm giving you to write your script. You got this. Great script. I love it. Here's your phone. Here's a friend that has a camera probably. There are ways to rent cameras, like for instance, in the Boston Public channel. There are ways where you can rent cameras if you need to, or again, start an Indiegogo page, get a little bit of money, do what you can. Here's how you can produce it, make it happen. And that's been my motivation as a teacher is offering that perspective.
Paloma, one of the, I think, great joys of the last year-ish plus was really watching you teach last spring as an artist in residence, and seeing you put that practice, those ideas into practice, right? Encouraging young people to understand that, they're not just the recipients of trauma or policy decisions that are being, made in Washington and handed down to them. No, they are people that are capable of entering that discourse, speaking back, creating their own stories about really anything. And so I just wanted to shout you out for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
But I also, we got a couple questions in the chat, and I think I might try to combine them if we can do that. So the first one is from Jaral Mackey, calling in from East Boston. Hi, Jaral. His question, actually, Jaral, do you want to speak your question, or would you like me to MC?
I'm indifferent. I can speak it if it's helpful. But
go for it.
So the question I was raising is that sort of how do you think about your work in reference to political progress, right? Particularly because part of the conversation we've been having so far has dealt with representation, the diversity of representation, and how as part of progress is seeing that expand. So if it's a helpful example, I think about Chris Rock creating Head of State, which is about a Black man being president, right?
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't create that type of art now, given who has occupied the White House in the past. I'm just wondering, as you see shifts within the political realm, how does that change your relationship to your art and the type of art that you think about creating?
Yeah, I think personally, I definitely observe the world around me. What I loved about doing the Pineapple Diaries was that, I had framed it to be that summer in the life of these characters. So the actual summer we were filming it was the summer of the life of these characters. So the summer of 2015, the summer of 2016, and then the summer of 2019. And what we talked about would reflect what was going on at the time, even if it outdated the show. It didn't matter. I liked that kind of that stamp on it. There's an episode where I have the characters are in a quarrel, and I have I can hear where I had edited it in, but they were watching TV and we had the TV on, but we had it off because obviously they had to do the dialogue. So in post-production, I added a clip of Trump doing he was on the camp. It was in the debate or one of the campaign trails. It was before he was elected. He hadn't been elected yet, president. And so just interesting when I look back at that, just because obviously in the 4 years that he was president, things have surfaced. I'm not going to say things changed, okay? Things surfaced, things came to the surface. I personally, I think that it's really important to to pay attention to what's going on in the world and show that in the work. And I think that, you know, I never pretend to be, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if activism is a word that I would describe myself as whatsoever. But, so I try not to like do too much preaching or like getting on my soapbox. I don't necessarily like doing that in my work. I think what I like to do in my work personally is ask questions. And I don't provide answers. And I honestly, like, you know, yeah, I could ramble on about whatever over Passover dinner, but I don't think that I have the answers, and I never want to be put in a position where people are like waiting for me to answer a question. Nope, not gonna happen, because I'm still out here just trying to figure stuff out myself. And I know how I feel right now, but instead I feel like everyone right now like gets on Twitter and they say what they, and I appreciate that because it fuels conversation and it's important, but I personally have never done that. I like to think about things, let things percolate, and then write about it as a form of a question instead of answering anything. I don't like to answer things in my work, but present questions. Yeah. Thank you, Joel. I have no idea if I answer your question. See? See how bad I am at it?
Well, you did, and as you know, part of as you rightly mentioned, part of art is not so much the answer, but just sort of listening to the thoughts and the process as we get there. So thank you so much. You did answer my question.
Yes, thank you.
And Keita had a question, a comment and a question, but her question was, what ideas / vision do you have that you feel could help more of these stories come through, and how can young people be further involved? So as you're thinking about the kind of stories that you want to see amplified in public discourse, how can that come to fruition?
Yeah, I think, you know, I always tell my students too, like, you know, the thing that you feel the most scared to talk about, like the thing that makes you feel like, ooh, that's like so weird, like this happened to me or whatever. And like, I don't know, I don't want to be this open. No one's going to relate to this. Like the thing that you think no one can relate to is the thing that everyone will relate to. It's the thing where everyone's gonna be like, oh my God, I cannot believe that this happened to somebody else, or that other people have had this sort of feeling. I just saw a YouTuber that I follow. She was just, she's pregnant and she's been married for a while. And she posted in her video about the pregnancy, her first reaction, which was terrible. Like she clearly was thinking about not keeping it. She was just terrified about how much her life would change. And it was just so raw. And I just feel like, I mean, I've never been pregnant, but I feel like that would be my reaction. I feel like the first thing I would think of is, I wouldn't think to myself, wow, what a miracle. Like, you know, even though I'm 33 and like, it would be wonderful. Like, obviously it would be something that I would welcome, but my first reaction would absolutely be like, oh my God, like I won't be able to do this and that and this and that anymore. Like it'll be the first thing I think of, like all this negative stuff. And she even says to everyone afterwards how scared she was to say, she thought she was going to be judged by people for being such a terrible human being, for having her first thought be, oh my God, ew, I hate this. Like, I don't want this, you know, but it was real. And so I feel like my thing I would tell people like is again, let yourself be vulnerable and share the thing you're scared of the most. And I promise you, and even if it backfires, like you speaking your truth, there can be nothing wrong with that. I just watched this show called P-Valley, and it's a show that I think is really, really important. It obviously puts complex characters, humanizes sex workers, strippers. This is important stuff. Like this is the stuff that we need to see, because there's all of this, taboo about that, you know, and I feel like we're living in a world now where it's like, no, like stop with all that stuff. Like these are human beings. Let's see their experiences. There's a homosexual relationship in the show with a man who, I'm not sure if he's trans, but he's certainly like, he's homosexual, and he's having sort of a relationship with someone that would be considered as a down low or something like that. And again, as a viewer, I'm watching it like, oh my God, he's going to turn on him. He's going to be a bad guy, you know? But no, it is the most romantic love story I have seen on television. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. It is a relationship between two people that really love each other in this complicated situation that they're in. And one of the most romantic television moments I've seen was on that show with these two characters, where nothing traumatic was happening. They were just having a beautiful romantic, like teen movie romance, like some bullshit. Like they had like, you know, lights in a car, and they had these Christmas lights in a car, and they were making out and saying sweet things to each other. That's the shit that we need to see. We can't always just be seeing these, you know, these depictions of trans life or homosexual relationships with this so much trauma attached. And not to say that it doesn't matter, those stories matter, and we need to see that too. But in addition to that, can we see just a universal love story that is of this within this context that so many would feel so distant from, like, you know, people who maybe don't work or live in the, you know, stripper jobs or stripper communities or something like that. They have this idea of what it is, and then you get this tighter glimpse into it, and it's authentic, it's complex, and it's human, and it's relatable. No matter where you come from, it's relatable. Because again, I watched that, I thought I had the same fluttering feelings you'd feel when you saw, like, you know, Leonardo DiCaprio fall in love with Kate Winslet on Titanic, like that kind of like beautiful love. But this kind of depiction was, again, one that I think gatekeepers would say, no, we can't do that. No one will agree with that. No one will understand that. No one, you know, and it happens, and we see it, and it's beautiful. So I just, again, to make a long story short, as I ramble on, just write the thing that you think that no one will understand, and somebody will. Most people will. Most people will.
Paloma, so I have probably what is a complicated question that we probably don't have time to answer fully. But obviously, you know, COVID has probably changed so much about how art is made, how art can be appreciated, has certainly probably disrupted projects in the pipeline. And so just as an artist, I wonder if you can talk about making art in this particular moment, challenges and opportunities.
I will try to make this answer short, because I know I'm a long talker. I feel like I'm still figuring that out myself. I feel like personally, I mean, I guess I'm saying personally, like, as if not everyone is going through it, but as people going through the pandemic right now, I feel comfort in watching depictions of pandemic, and I feel comfort in watching depictions that have nothing to do with pandemic. So again, it's kind of like the same sort of thing where all stories matter, all stories are important. And I think that personally, I have yet to feel like I want to tell a story of this time. But again, like I said, I'm a slow burner. I let things hang on for a little bit before I do anything with them. So in terms of storytelling, I'm still in the realm of like, I want to do stories about pre-COVID. This shit's too complicated, you know, the mask stuff. But I'm started watching This Is Us, which is one of my favorite, well, not one of my favorite shows, but it's just a really good soap opera, really good show. And they're doing COVID, and I'm getting people like having criticism over it. Like they think it's weird. I think it's great. I think they're doing a really great job. I feel close to the characters because all the stuff that they're doing, and putting the masks on, and all of this stuff that's being laced into the storyline that is pertaining to the pandemic, they decided not to avoid, to embrace. And I feel like it's great. It's great to watch. And obviously I like to watch things that have nothing to do with the pandemic. So in terms of storytelling, that's where I'm at. And in terms of, you know, logistics, I think that we shall see. I mean, hopefully lots of people will get vaccinated, hopefully, especially people in productions that obviously need to be around multiple people will get vaccinated. And I think that hopefully this will be over soon. And because I know productions are very complicated right now, given the social distancing and all that. So I know it's not easy. I have no advice. I guess that could have been my answer. I have no advice.
No, thanks for being real about that. As we kind of slide into part 3, which is our kind of concluding segment of tonight's event, short but sweet. I just wanted to say that, as we were planning, we are also conscious of the fact we've covered a lot of terrain, but we're conscious of the fact that this conversation is unfolding against a larger backdrop and conversation space about race and racism in the United States, in Boston specifically. And Paloma, something that you and I have talked candidly about is, the possibility or role of the arts in, both perpetuating racism, but also perhaps challenging and disrupting that, right? For instance, in Boston, we know that our legacy institutions, as the history books show, were founded with a pretty explicit focus on sort of promoting the purported supremacy of Eurocentric culture. That is just facts. That is facts. At the same time, we know that, the story has gotten a lot of air. There's been a lot of, I think, rightful criticism directed at our institutions. At the same time, it's not the entire story of arts and culture in the city. There's a lot of smaller cultural organizations that are committed to, reflecting the diversity of the city and to helping us, expand our cultural lens. And so the question becomes, and the question that has, brought us into conversation today is, why is that important, right? Why does broadening our public narrative matter? And there's so many threads of this conversation that speak to that question. But I think really at its most basic level, it is because political oppression in its many different manifestations is seeded by and in some ways sustained by culture and cultural discourse. This is a point that, for instance, sociologists like Patricia Hill Collins make exceptionally clear when she talks about the idea of controlling images and, stereotypes, and how stereotypes work to shift our vision away from the structural causes of inequality, right? Helping to, foment a distorted frame of reference that then kind of paves the path for inequality to manifest. So when we consider and this, I think, was part of maybe what you're getting at, Gerald, except for that I'm reversing the direction of causality, so you may challenge me. But when we consider the relationship between culture, politics, and justice, telling fuller stories is an incredibly important way of re-narrating. It's not the only way, it's not the most important way, but it is an incredibly important way of re-narrating the discourses that have limited our imagination. Mine included, right? So I wanted to say I'm grateful to you, Paloma, and artists like you who are committed to, to telling fuller truths, to representing a broader array of human experience. And I think that work is really important because it opens up space for us to consider the world in new ways and to also reconcile perhaps old narratives with fuller truths. There's a lot more that can be said about this, but I don't want to have the last word by any stretch of the imagination. And I'm also cognizant of the fact that, we've spent a lot of time talking about media and the media that we have seen, but I want to create space to think about the kinds of stories that we want to see. Space for us to, co-dream together as we wrap up this conversation. So here's how I think this can work. I would say let's take a couple minutes, maybe play another great tune, Gina, if you're up for DJing, and just spend some time thinking and reflecting on that question. And then when we come back together, we'll share, something about the kind of story that we want to see, and that will help us close our time together. Does that sound good? All right, so let's take about a couple of minutes to think. And I'll go ahead and ask Jackson to get us started, also known as Jacob.
Yeah, thanks. So I guess it's maybe one of the most simple but most complicated things, which is a story that I'd like to see more of is the sort of intergenerational normalization of diverse cultures, basically. So oftentimes, with people my age or people younger than me, they seem much more open to certain ideas socially, and then older people. And I think that one of those like beautiful things about all kinds of art is that like we can explain things with art that we can't explain otherwise, you know? And so to me, like, I think I'd like to see more stories where we can see, and it kind of brings back that beginning like activity that we did, which is, you know, the representation. Like if we see ourselves in something and like the character is working out like, oh, you know, it's not a big deal that these two people are gay, or like it's not a big deal that this person is a different race than you, like, you know, you can still live your life. Like if we can see that being worked out, you know, on stage or in a song or whatever, then maybe that can help us, you know, do the same thing. So those are the kind of stories I'd like to see more of.
I'll pop in next and I'll keep it quick because I'm gonna try to get us ended on time. Selfishly, this is not nearly as deep as what you said by any means. I just want to see more characters with curly hair. I love when I see that. I want to see more. And I want to see the next season of the Pineapple Diaries. And could I call on you, Mafe?
Yes, sure. So based on like everything Paloma was talking about, I was just thinking that I would like to see more stories that break away from stereotypes and the way that Latin American women are portrayed, because I don't think that there's like any issue with like sexuality or just like being sensual, but I do think that I would like to see stories in which Latin American women are not always like the objects of desire. So that would be, I would love that. Yeah.
And do you want to call on someone, Mafe?
Yeah, sure. Darcy.
If you feel comfortable, I should say.
No, that's fine. Hi. I actually think, you know, as much as I love stories, my whole life I've loved stories. The truth is that first question was hard for me because I don't see myself in a lot of stories as much as I find them interesting. What I find is when characters are the universal parts, when things happen or people have experiences that I can relate to, even though I don't really relate to the character as they're in their experience and background. So what I'd like to see is more, as I'm getting older, more older people stories that are not about just being old, but being normal and being old. And at the same time, I'd like to see more of the biracial stories that Paloma was talking about, because I think I'm afraid that unfortunately is still some sort of a taboo topic, which may be why it's not covered, but I would like to see that as something normal. So
that's my mom, everybody.
Yay.
Yeah. Thank you, Mom, for being here.
Thank you. It's been great listening and appreciating everything here.
And I think we have Gerald, Gina, and then Paloma. Maybe I'll give you the last word and then we'll say goodnight.
Raquel, I know you want to finish on time, so I'll be brief in wanting to just elevate what's been said before, different stories, and to let folks tell their own stories, right? Getting rid of the gatekeepers. So that's all I'll say for that. But thank you. This has been great.
And Gina, do you want to say a word?
Yeah, I think I'll just reiterate something that Paloma said that really resonated with me. And you said something like, tell the story that you think no one else is going to get. So I think for all the outcasts out there, wherever you are, that's great. And I guess I'll pass it on to Paloma now.
unmuted. Okay, it's funny because like obviously I think about this all the time, and yet this is hard for me to answer just in like one little box, and I know we have to end sort of on time, but I just feel like I just want to see more of or just pigging back off of what Jackson said, that there is this normalizing without having to explain things all the time. Like I think, you know, for instance, even in commercials, seeing someone who's selling me a mop be a biracial couple, or seeing, you know, just having a lesbian couple sell me a mop, like that's what I want. I want more of that. I want, again, like more normalizing. I want to see a mainstream magazine where like every single woman in it is Black. And I know we see that in the Black magazines, which I love and we need, but I mean to say that, or have like a magazine like Vogue and just like zero white people in it for once kind of thing, just for a second, just so that people can understand what the experience is like for people of color to be flipping through these magazines and to literally never ever see themselves in it. And it's just constantly like white person after white person after white person. Just seeing a little bit more, just again, like non-explained, more variety and normalizing of relationships, non-binary, you know, and fluidity, you know, actually to make it shorter, relationships. I just want to see much more variety of relationships in mainstream movies and television. And I also will note, I do really appreciate, because I come from a biracial household, biracial love on television, but I also feel that sometimes it replaces the concept of seeing just, you know, dark skin love and, you know, Black love. I feel like that I want also to not always be canceled out by putting a Black woman with a white man, or a white man with a Black woman as the Black representation, but actually, why don't we see two dark-skinned Black people in love in a mainstream film, mainstream television? That's what I want to see more of as well. Just random stuff. So, but also I wanted to say before we go, because thank you guys so much for your words and for staying here and just taking the time to join us tonight. And I really appreciate Raquel for inviting me, and Gina for everything. Honestly, I love Urbano. I'm from Jamaica Plain, and Urbano's been a part of the community for as long as I can remember, and I just really appreciate the support. And I also wanted to just quickly plug that at the moment, even though I'm not doing Pineapple Diaries and I feel the pressure to do another season, but I don't know about that, guys. I'm currently actually directing this documentary series for the Gardner Museum, which I really, really appreciate, because the Gardner Museum is connecting with luminary artists that are, you know, mostly artists of color in Boston, reacting to pieces in the museum with their own artwork. And so there's this documentary series. There are about, I think there are 6 episodes so far. And it's been a beautiful experience. And I also think in a way to represent more of what Boston has to offer in terms of the artist scene, and to show it in a little bit more of an intimate way. So if you guys want to check that out, I've been doing that. Sorry for all my rambling.
No, it's perfect. Thank you so much, Paloma. This has been a really dynamic evening. Thank you to everyone that has stayed for it. I just want to say one thing, that we're going to be here doing a similar thing, same time in 2 weeks. So that's April 28th. The focus of that conversation will be on identity and solidarity. That conversation will be facilitated by myself, Sam Richardson, and V. Haddad, who are collaborating on a really interesting photographic project called the Self-Service Photograph Project. We'll have more information to share about that, and we would love to see you there. So thanks everyone for coming, and we hope you have a good night.
Thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Paloma.